Keith Brown, on Monday, March the 21st, I received 9 emails from the Scottish Government ranging from children's rights to race equality, a £1.8 million investment in an Aberdeen oil firm, but nothing about a £10 billion trade deal agreement. Why was that?
Well, the last example you gave was £1.8 million of investment. There is no investment attached to this particular minute of agreement. This is just a minute of agreement to have further discussions, to facilitate those discussions. Of course, it could potentially be very lucrative for Scotland, great in terms of jobs and communities and businesses, but there is no project that's been announced at this stage. And of course, it was published. We've published both the MOU and separately we agreed with the Chinese partners that a press release agreed by both parties could be issued, which it was, on their English language website. So this has been published, but as yet there are no projects for us to announce.
So the people of China heard about this deal because it went through the Xinhua State news agency and was published in the China Daily, but nothing for the people of Scotland.
Well, that's not true. The company involved, they published it on their English language website. Now, this company has investments right across the UK. They're well known to authorities and governments in the UK. So this is a well-known company, and they published it on their website, an agreed press release with the Scottish Government. But I repeat once again, there were no projects at this stage for us to announce. If you look at Wales, for example, 5 years of work before a major announcement on the projects which were recently announced in terms of Port Talbot.
But this is a government that's not backwards about coming forwards in terms of press releases and so on. I got 9 that one day, as I said. You said it was published on the Sino-Fortone website, but how many people are looking at that? Why were the Scottish media not informed?
Well, I've explained, first of all, the minute of agreement has been published, but also the fact that the press release, an agreed press release issued under agreed circumstance, hardly chimes with some of the opposition calls that this is somehow a secret deal when it's been published on a public website in English language. But this is about a First Minister going out trying to attract money to Scotland. I would have thought the other parties, which have criticised us both for announcing things which they don't think are substantial enough, and now not announcing something for which there is no substance as yet in terms of a project, I think they've got this wrong. And the First Minister, trying to attract jobs to Scotland and investment, is doing exactly the right thing.
Willie Rennie, what's wrong with a £10 billion deal for Scotland?
Well, Andrew, I think your questions are very pertinent. I know that Keith is a very modest man, but the SNP are not, and they like to brag at every opportunity they can about anything they do at all. So it doesn't really make sense. It's quite curious how they've not announced this. They would usually take every opportunity. But I want to get to the substance of this. I want to understand really what is the deal about. What are the terms? Is it just finance, or are there operations involved too? And what checks have been done on these two companies? Have they got a good track record of working in this area? And has Keith pursued this personally himself? I would like to know that.
Well, Keith Brown, let's put that back to you. We've got the Memorandum of Understanding here. What is in it for China? What is the quid pro quo for China when it comes to these deals?
Well, first of all, I know that Willie completely failed to answer the question that you put to him, why it was bad news for Scotland to have a £10 billion deal. But the minute of agreement announces there, it actually lays out the fact that any announcement, any project that's taken forward would have to be compliant both with Scottish law and with EU law. There is no quid pro quo given here. China invests around the world currently. They do so on a huge scale, and there's no reason why Scotland should not have some of that investment coming to Scotland, whether it's for affordable housing, whether it's for transport. That's not specified yet because we're not at that stage yet. But it's got to be a good thing to be talking to people like this to try and get money into Scotland.
So Keith, my question specifically, very specific questions, was, is this about finance or is it about operations too? That's the first thing. But secondly, have you personally reviewed the performance of these two companies? Have they got a good track record? Do you know that before this agreement was signed?
Keith Brown, can you answer that? Is it finance, operations, and have you reviewed the track record of these two companies, Sino-Fortune and the China Railway No. 3 Engineering Group?
Well, once again, I note that Willie refuses to answer the question whether £10 billion of investment is good for Scotland. But of course it's about finance. That figure is in the minimum of agreement, £10 billion. We're not at the stage of discussing, I've said this 2 or 3 times now, we're not at the stage, whether it's the different parties involved or the Scottish Government, of discussing particular projects. What we have said is, and what the Chinese have said, there is potentially a pot of £10 billion here. Now, I would have thought that any responsible government, and certainly a First Minister interested in selling Scotland, will want to try and get access to that money for the public benefit of people in Scotland.
Well, Willie Rennie, Mr Brown has pointed out that you need to answer this question. What is wrong with a £10 billion deal for Scotland? You need to answer that.
Well, on the right terms, it's a good thing, but I want to understand if these are the right terms. And he's not answered my question yet again. Has he personally reviewed these two companies, Does he know whether they've got a good track record or not? Because I think that's fundamental to this agreement, and his inability to answer that question so far actually concerns me. Has he personally reviewed? Have they got a good track record?
Well, Mr Brown, if you would like to answer that
I'm
point.
pleased at last Willie has recognised that it might be a good thing for Scotland if we can get £10 billion of investment for jobs in our communities. In relation to the companies involved, of course, they deal with governments around the UK already. The UK government is dealing with these companies, has done a deal with these companies. The Welsh government has also done a deal with a company concerned as well, or they're involved alongside the UK government. So they have a track record. But we are not at the stage of actually announcing a project here. Of course there's further to go. It's got to be a good idea to have these discussions and for Scotland to attract foreign direct investment.
Finally, Mr Brown, is it not a little embarrassing that today your SNP colleague George Kerevan, who's a MP, is writing in the National today, essentially criticising Chinese imperialism? It's a little bit awkward, isn't it?
Well, what he was talking about, of course, were the massive investments which the UK government has asked for China to undertake into strategic things like nuclear power stations in the UK. This is not on the table for Scotland.
OK, Keith Brown, Willie Rennie, thank you both very much for joining me. Thank you. Now, Scotland remains divided in attitudes to taxation, according to a new